Okay, folks, we're live on YouTube, and looks like we weren't able to get live on Facebook for some reason, but we're live here. So please do come in on YouTube, and if our Facebook admin can put this URL link into the Facebook page there, please, with a note that we're live, because I'm afraid it didn't work. We'll try again on Facebook to try to bring in some of our Facebook friends. Okay, we're back now live on Facebook. And basically what we're doing today is broadcasting entirely in 2 or 3 minutes. We'll broadcast entirely on YouTube. We've got a lot to say. We want to bring in as many people onto YouTube, because YouTube is where it's going to be at in the future for us. YouTube is the place where we can get our subscriptions up, we can get our hours of viewing up, and then we can get monetized. That means we can carry adverts, and not only that, but we'll be able to broadcast outside as well on YouTube on a mobile phone. So we're really building up the YouTube platform at the moment. I see people are coming in on Facebook. I'm going to be just broadcasting on Facebook for a few minutes until we've got the YouTube live link up, and then we're just going to switch directly to YouTube. But it's a lot to talk about. 5 crises that are facing the country, 5 crises and 5 solutions that we're going to give you. So it's going to be an upbeat message, because goodness knows this has been a bad week basically for everybody. A lot of people have been very concerned with what's been happening, especially with the lockdown from both Boris and from Nicola. So we're going to talk about that, but we're going to give you a message of hope, because there's been too much negativity this week. So this is going to be a very hopeful message to get rid of the scaremongers, to get rid of the fearful, and to say, let's go forward together. Now, people are coming in on Facebook, but I have to say, we're going to switch now to YouTube, where we're all going to, we're going to continue this broadcast from here on in. And I see people coming in already on YouTube. Leslie, good afternoon to you. Richard, good afternoon to you. He says it's working here on YouTube. So folks, please click on the YouTube link there, which is in the Facebook box, and come through and watch us as we begin this tour de force today. 5 crises that are facing the country and 5 solutions that we've got for you. A tour de force over on our YouTube channel. Please, folks, join us there. Thanks very much for watching. Click on that YouTube link and come through. Thanks for that. Okay, we're back simply on YouTube now. Thank you for people who are coming through on YouTube. And let me begin. It's Saturday. It's Scotland. It's 1 p.m. That means we're back in original form. The legible, credible, inevitable storm, which is a force for good. Coming to you live from our nerve centre here in the great British city of Glasgow, with me, your host, Alistair McConaughey. And we've titled this one, 5 Crises Facing the UK and How to Solve Them. Because it seems that we're under a lot of pressure as a country at the moment. We seem to be getting bombarded on all sides with a lot of negative things that there doesn't seem to be any proper solution to. At least our politicians are not advocating any kind of solution, except making us even more fearful about life in general. So that's why we've decided to identify these 5 things. And these 5 things are COVID, Brexit, the Union, immigration invasion on the south coast, and the overall BLM woke agenda, which seems to be getting promoted by all the people in power. Those are the 5 things that are facing basically creating a crisis for the future of the United Kingdom. And we're going to address all 5 of these today. And if that wasn't bad enough, would you believe it? Uncle Ben is getting removed from the packaging of rice, okay? Just to rub it in, Uncle Ben is getting the heave-ho. No more Mr. Nice Guy, no more Mr. Rice Guy. And we'll be talking about Uncle Ben's predicament and how on earth it should come about as well later in the programme. But first, let's start, of course, with the COVID lockdowns, which seem to be getting worse and worse. You know, when we started back on the 23rd of March, we were told to flatten the curve, and everybody thought, yeah, no problem, we'll stay in for a couple of weeks, shouldn't be much of a big issue, gives us a couple of weeks off work, we're going to get paid for it, and if it helps the NHS, great. And that was the point, was to flatten the curve to help the NHS. Well, that has now morphed, 6 months later, that has now morphed into nobody must die of COVID ever. So it's moved from something which was a potentially feasible thing that we could all do, and which in fact happened, to something which is now an impossibility. And that's why people are getting so disturbed by all of this, because you cannot eradicate death. Death is something that's always going to be with us, and diseases are always going to be with us. And the best that we can do is to be sensible and to fight them through our own immune systems, not to use the power of the state to stop people actually meeting each other, to shut down society. That's not the way to do it. And, you know, I said that the fear is that nobody must die ever. Well, you see, people are dying all the time, and people are dying as a consequence of the neglect which this COVID, basically fanaticism, has created. Now, last week I spoke about the Office for National Statistics, which had told us that more than 6,700 extra deaths had been recorded in family homes across the UK in the last 2 months. And while I was doing some research, I also came across this article, which is actually 2 or 3 months old, saying an extra 10,000 dementia deaths in England and Wales back in April. An extra 10,000 people died of dementia who would not normally die. Now that's a scandal. That's an absolute political scandal. But in the COVID hysteria, it's almost suppressed if it wasn't for this one article that I found in The Guardian. And the Alzheimer's Society says that these deaths are resulting partly from increased cognitive impairment caused by isolation, the reduction in essential care as family carers cannot visit, and the onset of depression as people with dementia do not understand why loved ones are no longer visiting, which is causing them to lose skills and independence, such as the ability to speak, or even in worst cases, stopping eating and drinking. And another factor is, of course, interruption to the usual health services, with more than 3/4 of care homes reporting that GPs have been reluctant to visit people in their care homes. So these are national scandals. And when all of this is blown over, all of these statistics will come out, and the politicians will have to answer for that. They will have to answer for the extra deaths that have been caused by their lockdown. And I was talking to somebody this morning who's saying that they're noticing a terrible thing, an increase in suicides as well being reported in their local area of the city. Now, these things are a consequence, no question about it, of the isolation that many people are suffering, and the pointlessness that they see in life as a consequence of there being no apparent light at the end of the tunnel. And when a light at the end of the tunnel appears to arrive, it gets closed down again. So one good thing is there's a big demonstration today in Trafalgar Square. I don't know how it's going to go down. The Metropolitan Police are worried about it. Somehow they're worried about that demonstration. They don't seem to be worried about the other BLM demonstrations and so on. But the Metropolitan Police are putting out all sorts of adverts on social media this morning, telling people not to go and so on and so forth. But these sorts of things have to start to happen, not just in Trafalgar Square, but throughout the United Kingdom, because it seems that there is no more any rhyme or logic to it. And what we're also being told is completely ridiculous. You know, here's a good letter in the Telegraph saying that Sir Patrick Vallance, the chief scientific advisor to the government, tells us the epidemic is doubling every 7 days. Well, of course, what he's talking about is recorded cases of people developing an immune response. That's not a disease developing, that's people developing an immune response. Anyway, thus he calculates, somewhat frighteningly, that we will have 50,000 new infections a day by mid-October and 200 deaths a day a couple of weeks later. Well, this person looks at that exponential theory and concludes, applying exactly the same method, the entire population will have had COVID-19 and 11.5 million of us will be dead before Christmas. Shortly after New Year's Day, all human life in the United Kingdom will have ended. And that's where you take, that's in fact the logical point at which you arrive if you take these sorts of, this sort of scaremongering seriously. And that's government advisors. That's government advisors doing that. And basically, Alison Pearson wrote as well a very good article, and she was talking here about one of the government advisors, Professor Ferguson, who is responsible, of course, for the initial hysteria. And it's not the first time he's been responsible for hysteria. She says, as a mother, I detest him and his recklessly inaccurate model for laying waste to my children's prospects. I despise those senior civil servants who have secure pensions and nothing to fear from the economic danger their myopic safetyism has wrought. And I am coming to hate the men in Downing Street who are so busy eliminating risk, mainly to their own reputations, that they condemn the elderly to wither in loneliness and treat students like cattle with foot and mouth. And goodness me, we've seen that here in Scotland. Can you ever imagine a day where the First Minister of Scotland would tell students that they can't meet their parents, or would tell students, freshers who have just left home for the first time, that they have to isolate in their rooms? This is not the job of a politician to do, not in our so-called free society, or what we thought used to be our free society. So there is going to have to be some kind of pushback. How that happens, we don't know, but we're getting signs at the moment that more people now are just saying enough is enough. And people like Sturgeon and Johnston have to read the runes, and they have to know that they can't get away with this forever. So they need to be thinking about, how do we back out of this? And here's a couple of solutions. The first thing is, this hysteria has been created by the mass media, okay? The mainstream media, especially the BBC. Now, if the BBC wants to get us out of this, all it has to do is to start emphasizing the deaths of people from other causes, like the 10,000 a month almost, certainly 10,000 a month in April, of dementia, the 6,700 extra deaths last month in England and Wales. It needs to start emphasizing that. It needs to start telling those stories. And suddenly people will be realizing there's more people dying of that than there is of COVID. And it's a consequence of the COVID lockdown. And when the media starts pushing that narrative, believe me, they can change this around almost overnight. So that's the narrative that they have to be speaking about. And they can do that, but the media is not doing that. So why is it pushing these alternative stories? You know, the media is good at changing the narrative when it wants, you know, when it feels that the population are going a certain way, they'll bring up a sob story about something or other and change it around. So the media can change this around, and the way they will do it, they have to do it, is by emphasizing the deaths of people from non-COVID as a consequence of the COVID lockdown, and how those deaths are hugely outnumbering the deaths of people with COVID. And that's what they have to start doing. When they will start doing it, I don't know. But that's how we'll get out of this. That's how we'll get out of this. And as for Boris Johnson and Nicola Sturgeon, they just have to accept that we can't prevent everybody dying of COVID. What we have to do is to protect the certain vulnerable groups, and for the rest of us, we have to get back to normal life. And that has to be just something that they do. And once they've done it, it'll be an awkward few days. It'll be an awkward 72 hours, a little bit of backtracking, some red faces all round. But within a week, everybody will have forgotten about it and will be going back to normal, because that's the way that society works. Most people don't remember what happened yesterday, let alone last week in politics. So you can turn this around if you have the will to do it, and if the media wants to. But the media, for some reason, is happy just to keep going with this lockdown narrative. And that does give rise to all sorts of strange theories on the internet, none of which we are endorsing, but we can understand why people come up with strange theories when the reality seems so unusual. Okay, so that's basically COVID. That's the COVID thing, and it can be sorted. That's my message of hope to you. It will be sorted. We can't defeat the virus. We have to learn to live with it and follow a strategy to protect the elderly. But trying to stop people dying of COVID per se is a fool's errand. It's a fool's errand. It's a pointless journey. Now, so that's COVID. The second big thing that's facing the country, and some people would say it was the biggest thing, if that's your thing, is Brexit. Okay, and sorting out what to do with Brexit. Now, in many ways, this is perhaps the most hopeful one, a force for good. As you know, we support British independence. We didn't have an opinion on it prior to 2014, because we knew that lots of people who were for the UK Union also supported membership of the EU. But when we realized that the SNP was weaponizing it for their own purposes, then of course we had to support Brexit. And there's lots of good things as well, of course, with British independence. And it looks like we're probably on track to get a fairly good Brexit if things go according to plan. But of course, we have up here in Scotland the SNP who are trying to scupper it. And I want to just talk about that for a moment. They want the various powers to come that have come back to the British Parliament to come back to go to Holyrood, okay? Just saying some hello to some people there. Derek's listening from Perth. We did get an email about the poll asking people to sign, but we decided not to publicize that for various reasons. We get a lot of people will send us, would you sign, would you advertise this particular poll, but sometimes we don't do it because that can take up a lot of our time, I'm afraid. Neil is watching from Hamilton. David, yeah, makes a good point about people dying of other things. The fact the general population are content with the government legislating against their civil liberties is terrifying. I know. I can't fathom it at the moment. Mr. Mawson says hello. Good folk. Thanks for coming in. If you're watching on Facebook, please do. If you're watching on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up, and please, if you're not already subscribing to us, please click that red button for subscriptions. We want to get up to at least over 1,000. Bartoy says, watching from the great Unionist town of Renfrew. Fantastic. James, good to see you. Hope to meet up with you again soon, James. And thanks. We will keep up the good work. Yeah, so back to the Brexit and the internal market. It is absolutely 100% correct that the British government controls all the internal market rules for the United Kingdom, because otherwise you would have such an absolute hodgepodge that Scotland, England, Northern Ireland and Wales could not trade with each other. There has to be one set of rules for trading, and that has to be governed by the central British Parliament, which is responsible for all parts of the United Kingdom. That's just obvious. There shouldn't even be a discussion about that. But of course, the SNP have always tried to misrepresent what devolution is about. The devolution, and we wrote an article on devolution, which we can put up in the link there. Devolution is about British state power exercised in a vertical, not a horizontal level. You have the British Parliament, and coming off that are the arms of the devolved administrations. Okay, they're not equal. They're not in a line equal with each other. They're in a vertical relationship. Okay, so it's the British collective central parliament which is responsible for those sorts of laws which apply to everybody and which have to apply to everybody if we are to run the economy properly. So it's not for the SNP to imagine that these powers belong to Holyrood, but they imagine that because they don't respect devolution. You know, they will say the government wants to destroy devolution, or the government is disrespecting devolution. They are the ones, the SNP are the ones who want to destroy devolution. They want to destroy it entirely. They want independence. For them, devolution is just a minor irritant at the moment that they will exploit as much as they can. They are the ones who are against devolution. It's the SNP who are anti-devolution. They actually want to destroy it and bring in their so-called independence, which is the separation of the United Kingdom, the destruction of the United Kingdom. So they're the ones who are against devolution, not the other parties. But they have always tried to portray the Scottish position at the moment as if we're already independent, and they act like they're already independent, and they act like they're somehow being put upon by some, as they will always say, some colonial master, without understanding it's simply the British Parliament, which is the parliament of our nation of families. It's the parliament for our nation of unions. It's the parliament for the United Kingdom. And the other point, of course, is the hard border, so-called, between Northern Ireland and the EU. And you either put it between the Northern Ireland and the Republic, or you put it in the Irish Sea. But if you put it in the Irish Sea, then what you're doing is you're actually saying Northern Ireland is no longer part of the United Kingdom. So you don't do that. It's going to have to go. The hard border, so-called, which won't really be that particularly hard, but the border has to be between the Northern Ireland and the Republic. That's where that border has to go. That's where it should have gone in the original discussions about this. Who knows why that was not properly pointed out, but it seems to be going back there. Now, the Republicans will say, oh, how can you have a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic? Because that's a breach of the Good Friday Agreement. Well, by exactly the same token, a border separating Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom is also a breach of the Good Friday Agreement, if you believe that both sides should be respected in that regard. Now, I just want to give a wee plug, actually, for a very good wee book on Brexit. It's called Brexit, The Road to Freedom, and it's by Will Podmore. And you get it off Amazon. It's covers a lot of issues. It comes from perhaps more of, it's not, I would say, what shall I say, not so much a capitalist free market point of view, but perhaps a more economic nationalist point of view. So from our point of view, we're really quite taken with it. Brexit, The Road to Freedom. It was written in 2018, 2 years after the vote. And he also talks as well about Scotland. And he points out that in the so-called white paper that was written by the British Civil Service at our expense, it was stated that it was a possibility, quote, that in less than 4 years' time, Scotland could be forced out of the EU, even if a majority of people in Scotland want to retain membership. So people in Scotland were quite well aware that leaving the EU was a possibility if we stayed within the UK, yet still a majority of people voted to stay within the UK. And when we look back at the Brexit vote in 2016, over 1 million people in Scotland voted to leave, even though there were no political parties other than the fringe parties advocating such, even though all the mass media in Scotland was for Remain, and even though all the politicians were for Remain, even though the Tories, Labour, Lib Dem, Greens and SNP stood shoulder to shoulder, literally in photo shoots advocating Remain, even then over 1 million people in Scotland voted to leave, which is really quite a remarkable sociological fact and political fact, considering that they had nobody speaking for them. So there is a strong body for leave in Scotland, and there always has been. And the third point that I wanted to make here was about the union and its future as well as we go into next year. Now, the union is something that's always going to be fought for. It always has to be fought for. There's never going to be a day and age when we can say, oh, the union is safe now. The union of all our parts in the United Kingdom is something that we have to do, not just hope it continues to exist by some force of nature or something like that. It's something that constantly has to be advocated for, constantly has to be promoted. And our opponents, the Scottish nationalists, they understand the same thing about their point of view. Scottish separation, they call it independence, has to be constantly advocated for. So it's just the political battle of life, the battle between ideas. And the union, we believe, will be with us so long as we continue to advocate for it and so long as we have eloquent people speaking for it throughout the United Kingdom and throughout our political establishment and throughout our media system as well. And talking about media systems, there's a new news channel to be launched called GB News, which is going to be chaired by Andrew Neil. This was announced yesterday. It's going to come online and also on the television next year. Don't know when next year, but that might possibly be, we'll have to see, but it might possibly be a way for the Unionist message to get out, because as we've said many times before, the British Broadcasting Corporation seems to us not to really care for promoting the union, even though it should be biased, even though the British Broadcasting Corporation should be biased to hold the United Kingdom together. It doesn't appear to us that it really is taking that bias. It really should take that bias. As for SNP TV, otherwise known as STV, who knows about them, really? But neither of those two mainstream media outlets have ever contacted a Force for Good in our 8.5 years of existence. And as we always say, we're not expecting a call anytime soon. So things that can be done to support the union. We can't improve at this stage upon our speech that we gave, 12 ways to strengthen the British Union. And if those 12 things were followed, the British Union would be a lot stronger. We're going to develop upon that in an article which we're working on and which will be published possibly this week as well. But check out our 12 ways to strengthen the British Union, and we can put the link up there as well. Now, the fourth thing that concerns us is, of course, what is essentially an immigration invasion of the South Coast, where hundreds of young men are arriving on dinghies every day. And it's really quite ironic that they should be arriving on the south coast, because anybody who's been on the south coast knows that right along the south coast are castles, Dartmouth Castle, Dover Castle, other castles, which were built over the centuries to keep people out. You know, they always say, oh, Britain's always been welcoming to immigrants. Well, not really. Not really. We used to literally try to shoot them out of the sea. Now, we're not advocating that as such, but we're certainly advocating a much more rigorous approach to this, because it's appalling that all of these people are coming into this country. It's appalling at any time, but it's especially appalling when we're meant to be suffering from some kind of pandemic. And there was a very good interview with a fellow from something called Migration Watch, which was on talk radio, and his name was Benjamin Loughlane, and he stated the obvious, and we'll put the link up there, that the British government could easily pass emergency legislation to deal with this situation, whatever the so-called human rights laws may be. We've seen how it can easily pass emergency legislation in the British Parliament in a matter of hours, not days or weeks or months like some of the acts take. But if it's emergency legislation, they can literally just rush it through within a few hours, and then it becomes the law. So why can they do that for COVID, but they can't do it for this immigration invasion on the south coast? Is it because there's simply no will to do so? And you know, if they wanted to, as well, as Loughlane pointed out, they could also just use the coronavirus as the excuse. You know, if they wanted to be kind of politically correct about it, they could say, we're stopping these people coming in because of coronavirus. After all, they're coming over on a dinghy, more than 6 of them sitting together. So, and then if they've come over, why aren't they being literally isolated in rooms on their own for 14 days, like our poor students have apparently got to do? Why is there like one law for us, but they can just do what they want? Okay, so emergency legislation needs to be passed to stop them. Now, what will that emergency legislation involve? And this is where you weed out the youthful boy MPs from the men MPs, okay? Because this is where the rubber hits the road. And this is the measure of a man. This is the measure of an MP, because this is what you're going to have to do, okay? You're going to have to stop these boats coming in to British territorial waters, okay? Now, that is a use of force that the border ferry, otherwise known as border force, but we call it the border ferry, is not capable of doing. That's something for the Royal Navy to do. And you literally guard your territorial waters, and you keep these people out. And if they come in, you arrest them and you imprison them for a period of time until they are shipped back out again. They're not allowed to walk about. They're not allowed to go into a 4-star hotel. They're not allowed to just wander about your town. They will be imprisoned with proper facilities, obviously, but they will be imprisoned for the amount of time it takes you to ship them back again. Now, that will create tension between Britain and France. But the thing is with France, and this is what we've got to understand, France has never been Britain's friend throughout all the centuries. Britain and France have always had conflict. Now, some SNP people will say, oh, but we had the alliance with France back in goodness knows when. Well, sort of we did, but even that wasn't really that much, to be frank with you. Generally speaking, France has been against the British Isles all its history, and vice versa. You know, so this may be another conflict that's coming up, but it has to be brought to the level where the Royal Navy gets involved and you say, this is very serious, Mr. Macron, okay? And we risk falling out here and creating an international incident, but you're going to have to do something. And he can do it. He can stop these boats coming because it's his country. And I'll tell you why in a moment, why he can stop these boats coming. But that separates, as I say, the men from the boys. That's the measure of an MP, whether you'll get behind that. And of course, you can expect that at least half the House won't, but you'll probably have a majority even today to do that. At least you should try to do that and start speaking about it and make it an issue. Because here's another thing, right? There's only 2 young lads down there who are reporting on it, okay? If you are on social media, one calls himself Active Patriot, another calls himself Steve Laws, and they are just like young chaps. They've got a mobile phone and they just video what's going on. And so that's how we know about this. It's on mainly on Twitter. You can watch their reports, but that's just 2 young guys, 2 young patriotic fellows doing that, basically trying to tell the country what's happening. And of course, the mainstream media are suppressing it all again. But goodness me, what a moral boost it would be to the nation if we had MPs who would stand up against this literal physical invasion of people who are illegal. Technically, they're totally illegal on those matters, and they can apply for asylum elsewhere if they really want. But somebody pointed out here in a letter to the Telegraph that the United Kingdom has given millions of pounds to the French to increase security and stop the boats from leaving their shores. It is simply not good enough for them to say that they have 300 miles of coast to patrol, because all of these boats will have left from Close to Calais, as this is the shortest route to Dover. So how could the French possibly fail to see as many as 27 boats departing and not do anything? And as an aside, I'll also point out, how can the British not fail to see it? Because we've got a drone in the sky. And believe me, these drones can photograph your face from up there. So we can see every single boat that's leaving. We can see that from the drone in the sky. So we know exactly where these boats are leaving from, and we can tell the French, and the French could get a drone up in the sky and find out as well. So there's no political will to do anything, which is a disgrace. But the man writing this goes on, he says, the sooner Britain adopts the Australian tactic of pushback, which is the prevention of boats entering the country's waters, then the better. Currently, border force cutters is like a small boat. Border force cutters are having the opposite effect to preventing this traffic, because they are acting as lifeboats and migrants are deliberately heading towards them. So we have to adopt pushback, as Australia has done. And UN human rights experts have said that pushback is possibly illegal. Well, so what? You know, we've got a country to defend here. And it's not illegal as far as looking after British people's interests is concerned. Finally, we should be told what the French are doing to establish where the traffickers are getting their boats, because many of these are rigid inflatables with outboard motors, and there can only be so many suppliers of those. Of course, absolutely. There's not an endless supply of these. Somebody is supplying them. It will not be difficult to find out who, because it's not very easy to transport an inflatable, a rigid inflatable, to these areas. Somebody's going to be doing it. Somebody can be spotted, somebody can be arrested, and you can find out and you can stop that traffic for a start. So much that can be done there. So much that can be done, and I hope we've given the politicians some ideas. And finally, the fifth thing that's facing us is the BLM woke fanaticism and agenda, which seems to be everywhere at the moment. I'm talking about the National Trust, for example. I'm talking about these people who are trying to befoul Henry Dundas's statue. I'm talking about the people who took Uncle Ben off the rice packaging. Now, that for me is a very unusual one, because I would have thought that the modern trend was not to remove pictures of Black people from products, but to put, more pictures on the products. So I don't understand why they took Uncle Ben off. And I was talking with somebody else the other day, and we came to the conclusion that it was because he was too friendly looking, and he might have been too nice for his own good. And as such, maybe they thought that he was a wee bit stereotypical or something like that. Maybe they wanted somebody these days to be more kind of gangster rap or something like that. Something a bit more Antifa. Don't really know quite why, but it does seem to me, and I'm talking seriously here when I say it's like a blow to race relations, because growing up, when I was growing up in a little village in Scotland, Uncle Ben was the only black man I was ever acquainted with, basically. Well, apart from Trevor McDonald, who was a newsreader, and Lenny Henry, who was a comedian. But apart from them, you know, Uncle Ben played like a role model role in my life. So I don't see how race relations can be benefited by taking him off the packaging. Just seems a kind of crazy thing. And I would like to find out what the explanation is for that. How do you fight racism by removing well-loved black icons from society? Seems strange to me. Richard says it's so foolish. Yeah. Well, what I would say to you, and I thought if Uncle Ben's getting removed, I need to get a memento. So I went into Asda yesterday and I got Uncle Ben's limited edition Caribbean inspired flavor. So I'm not sure what I should actually do with that. Maybe I'll put it on my mantelpiece or something like that. But it could become this cost me £1, so it could be a good investment. Maybe in like 20 years I can sell it for like 2,000 or something like that. I don't know. But when's the sell by date? 100 and it's one of these strange ones. 150,721. Well, that gives us plenty of time. Oh, right. 15th of July 21. Well, I think I'm going to keep that because it's got a Caribbean angle as well, and it's limited edition. And there's old Uncle Ben there, who is apparently a real person. Apparently there was a real rice farmer, and there was also Uncle Ben. I think the rice farmer was Uncle Ben, and that fellow was modelled on another chap. So yeah, the BLM thing is going crazy, and we're a bit light-hearted there, but a very serious point as well is in the national newspaper, which we read so that you don't have to. There's actually a horrible article was written by their online digital editor, who was basically saying that all cops are the B word, and that's why I say ACAB and why you should too. And his article here is an absolute disgrace that it got published in any paper. And it was published, of course, 2 or 3 days before the horrific murder of the policeman yesterday in London. And so I haven't seen any politician here in Scotland to call out this horrible article that was written on the 21st of September 2020, just claiming, that the police are tools of the state. Well, of course they're tools of the state. They always have been. That's their job. They follow who the government is, whether it's a Tory government, a Labour government, or here in Scotland, whether it's an SNP government, or if this bloke and his friends ever got charged, they would follow his instructions. That's what the police do. Of course, they're tools of the state, if you want to put it like that. That doesn't make it wrong. I mean, you still need them. And so to turn around and call them nasty names like that is horrific. He wants to disband and replace them because they're ineffective and outdated, and they don't protect our communities. What a moron. Also, Holyrood magazine. Now, Holyrood magazine is one of these magazines that only survives thanks to your taxpayer money. And it's written by troffers. By troffers, I mean people who just gorge at the expense of the state. It's written for troffers, which is to say many of our politicians, by troffers, people who would not have a job and certainly would not have a magazine unless the British taxpayer was paying for it. And I say the British taxpayer is paying for it because it comes out of the Scottish Parliament's budget. And I'm not going to show you the picture, but this week they had a picture of Boris Johnson on fire, okay, on fire. And the fire thing feeds into the BLM looting and burning scenario. And then also notice there are articles there. One's on climate change, which is a complete hoax. And another is interviewing a Black Lives Matter organizer in Edinburgh. They'll never see their way, of course, to interview a force for good. But these are just examples of the extent to which that woke agenda has gone into the system, right through it. Now, there is a solution to that, and it's simply to defund organizations that promote that sort of ideology. And when I say organizations like that, I'm talking about everything from the National Trust to many of our charities and national institutions these days. Simply defund them, because a lot of these charities that promote the woke agenda and promote the BLM lies, they are being funded by the British taxpayer, largely funded by it. And so you simply defund them. And that's a very straightforward thing to do. And I'll give you an example of somebody that's just done that in a minute in his country. But we were also minded of this when we saw this article about there's a training course going through Westminster at the moment where the MPs are required to check their white privilege and to write messages and poems and self-flagellate themselves in Westminster. Now, this is happening. This training program, which is essentially is a sort of anti-white racist training program, is going on in Westminster while we have a Tory government with an 80-seat majority. And people, the people are saying, well, we shouldn't have to be forced. Well, one or two people are saying we shouldn't have to be forced to do this. It shouldn't be happening in the first place in Westminster. It shouldn't be happening in the first place. Do you follow that? It shouldn't be happening in the first place, Mr. Johnston, Priti Patel. Get that just has to go. That has to go. So you have to defund all of these organizations. And last week, President Trump issued an executive order which prevented what's called critical race theory, which is that idea, the idea that the nation and its people are fundamentally racist. He issued an executive order, and we'll put the link to that executive order up there. He prohibited it from being promoted via training sessions in any part of the federal government or in any part of the US military. And the British government could do the same thing. But not only that, it went after these companies in that it prohibited any federal grants to any organization which might promote such ideas. So that would mean you'd be cutting out funding to all these big bodies that love to promote their woke agenda on our taxpayer money. And it also prohibited the federal government from employing any company which elsewhere in its activities would promote such activity. So that's an amazing defunding of the woke agenda through every arm of the federal government in the USA. And that's something that could easily be done here in the United Kingdom. And if you had a traditional conservative government that was concerned about those sorts of things and getting rid of the woke agenda, then, and especially the BLM agenda, which is just racial lies, then that's what would happen. Lots of people would scream because lots of people would be losing their trough to gorge at, their income to talk nonsense. But that's what would have to happen. It would be revolutionary. And if we had such a conservative, revolutionary minded government, those are things that could happen. So my point is that there are solutions to these things. There are solutions to these things, and there are examples of them working. And that hopefully gives an upbeat message to you that these things can be sorted if there is the will. At the moment, we just need to change the mentality, the passiveness of our politicians. We need to change that so they can be proactive, just like we had often in the past. So talking about the past is something that we really care about, and we love studying our history. So this coming week in British history is something that you can see on our Facebook and on our Instagram. And I'm just going to go through some of the amazing things that have happened this week in British history. On this day, on the 26th of September in 1934, the Queen Mary was launched in the Clyde. Now, the Queen Mary is still with us. She's docked at Long Beach in California, and she was a floating hotel. How she's been affected by the COVID lockdown, goodness knows. On the 27th of September in 1952, the Queen Mother unveiled the Commando Memorial at Speen Bridge, which is a really glorious memorial to British bravery, because of course the commandos trained mainly in the rough hills of Scotland in that area. The Commando Training Centre was close to Speen Bridge. On the 28th of September, back in 1582, a great Scotsman called George Buchanan died. Now, he was the tutor to our man James VI, who created this wonderful flag. We did a video on YouTube, actually, of George Buchanan, and we'll stick that up there in the link as well. And on the 28th of September in 1974, Warlord, the boys' comic, was launched. And I remember that comic, and I had lots of copies of it when I was younger. And it's a genre of British comics that were right for the time, but you don't see them anymore. And basically what killed the British boys' comic of that genre was the film called Star Wars, which created kind of new consciousness among children, which emphasized fantasy and futurism rather than history and heritage, or even present day happenings. You know, you used to get comics with footballers and runners and motorcyclists and soldiers and things like that. And that changed to comics with like monsters and space aliens and things in the future. And that's where we're still stuck at with a lot of children's entertainment today, is this futurism, rather than looking to a future that's not even a real future, it's just a fantasy future, rather than looking either at things that are happening today and giving young children encouragement for that, or things that have happened in the past and giving you inspiration from the past. 28th of September 1928, Alexander Fleming discovered mold growing on his Petri dishes and essentially discovered the first antibiotic. Today, 28th of September in 1745, the very first rendition of God Save the Queen was played at the Drury Lane Theatre in London and became, of course, a sensation. And many of the Scottish nationalists will tell you completely wrongly, because they know very little about history and they choose to accept nonsense, but they'll tell you that there's a controversial verse, so-called, in that national anthem. There's not. There never has been. We wrote a very extensive 5,000-word dissertation examining all the sources on that and discovered that it was just largely a myth, because the very first three verses that were sung and recorded that night are essentially the same three verses that are still today the national anthem. We'll stick that link up there as well. On the 29th of September 1758, Horatio Nelson, the great Lord Nelson, was born, the sixth of 11 children. On the 29th of September 1902, one of our favourite poets, William Topaz McGonagall, passed away in Edinburgh. And we always like McGonagall because he was a great British patriot, a great loyalist, a great imperialist, and we love his quirky style. And we were interested to discover his interesting analysis linking home rule to too much alcohol. Yes, the man that gets drunk is little else than a fool, and is in the habit, no doubt, of advocating for home rule. But the best home rule for him, as far as I can understand, is the abolition of strong drink from the land. And the men that get drunk in general want home rule. But such men, I rather think, should keep their heads cool and try and learn more sense, I most earnestly do pray, and help to get strong drink abolished without delay. And McGonagall was born to Irish parents in Edinburgh sometime in March 1825. And we did a little video, and we'll get that up this week, later this week. We'll edit that and put it up. We did a little video at the memory, the plaque in Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh. And my favourite verse, though, of McGonagall is his verse about Glasgow, when he says, "Beautiful city of Glasgow, I now conclude my muse, and to speak in praise of thee my pen does not refuse. And without fear of contradiction, I will venture to say, you are the second grandest city in Scotland in the present day." The second grandest city in Scotland in the present day. Thank you, William. On the 30th of September 1840, the first stone for Nelson's column in Trafalgar Square was laid. Now that was 35 years after the Battle of Trafalgar, but it was not the first monument to Nelson, because prior to that, 3 monuments had been established in Scotland. The first one was in 1805, the year of Trafalgar, when the men at the ironworks that made the cannonballs erected a standing stone to him. That's in Argyll, the Bonawy Furnace in Argyll, and that's a tourist attraction to this day. The Glasgow Nelson's column was also erected just a few years, in 1806, 1 year after Nelson. It was the first built monument. And then in 1812, Nelson's Tower in Forres was erected, which is still there today, and you can climb up that and get a view of the surrounding countryside. The 1st of October 1873, the Englishman who created perhaps Scotland's most iconic painting, the Monarch of the Glen, that's Sir Edwin Landseer, he passed away. And on the 2nd of October 1846, the paddle steamer Waverley, which is still with us, was launched on Clydeside, and it was named after the Walter Scott novel. Now, it was the second Waverley, the second ocean-going paddle steamer. The first one had been tragically hit by German bombers off Dunkirk while it was ferrying hundreds of troops back to Blighty, and hundreds of soldiers were killed in that attack. So the Waverley that's with us today is actually the second Waverley. Anyway, we'll be writing up those sorts of things in our Facebook page this coming week. And I've been talking so much today that I have not given a plug to our wee book for the Union. Now, this, you really need to have this if you don't have it already. It tells you lots of stuff that we've basically compressed a lot of our knowledge into easily read and really attractive wee pictures, perfect bound, pocket book. It's only a £5. Buy one for yourself. Christmas will be coming in 3 months' time. If it hasn't been banned by Nicola Sturgeon, please do buy a few of these for your nieces and nephews, your grandchildren, whatever, because They're really good wee reads, really good wee patriotic British reads. And of course, don't forget our badges. Well, just go to our shop, which is on our website, aforceforgood.uk, and you can get our little badges. That's this badge here, and this one is our Union Heart, and the Union Heart both says A Force for Good right through the middle of it. And keep in touch with us, of course. Go to aforceforgood.uk/support and put in your name and your email, and you'll be told what we're doing. And if you want to come out with us on the street, it's not possible at the moment for obvious reasons. But if you want to be like an activist with us on the street, please tell us so that we know about you, because we won't be able to invite you out to our events unless we know that you want to join us. And you meet a great team there. You'll be rolling with the AFFG crew, as we like to say, which is a great bunch of folks. And we thank them all who come out with us. And we have a good time. We have a good time because we're all standing for something that we really, really believe in. So folks, that's 2 o'clock. Thank you so much for watching. Unless the lockdown is lifted, we're going to be back here next Saturday. We'll be on YouTube again. So please check in at 1 o'clock, and please do click that red subscribe button. If you click it and they say that you need to get yourself a YouTube account, that's easy enough. Just follow the instructions. They'll ask you to get a Google account, and then when you've got your Google account, you'll get your YouTube account, and that will allow you to subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, comment on the video, comment below the video, whatever. But let's get these subscribers up, because we want to reach 1,000 as soon as possible so we can get monetized, and so that we can start to broadcast outside, and so that we can really build our voice, build our platform, because YouTube is something that we're really putting our efforts into now. So please do that if you can. And thank you for watching. Any ideas that you've got for future broadcasts or anything like that, please do contact us. For now, it just remains for me to say, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. God bless the United Kingdom, and God save the Queen.